Alright everyone, it's time for Occult Literature, video number 131, Aula Lucis. This is actually an interesting little alchemical manuscript by Thomas Vaughan. Only 25 pages, so it's one of these shorter manuscripts that I sometimes crank out. A lot of times they get neglected. Nobody else wants to edit works unless they're full length. Meanwhile, I'm sitting here, a lot of the works that I collect are booklet length. I find them interesting and I think, they deserve a modern edition too. And I looked, and some of the other competing editions of this are either vastly overpriced or full of filler. The page count is a little bit different from mine, or it looks like they just took a scan of the document from the 16th century and slapped it into a PDF, which means no editing whatsoever. As always, link in the description to my edition of this work on Amazon. Second and third links to my two respective book blogs. They're mirrors of one another. They're exactly the same. One's on Blogspot, one's on WordPress. They're both just as functional at this point. I did that. I wanted to diversify beyond just Blogspot because, Google might suddenly cut the service off at some point. I'd have to use WordPress anyway. Might as well get used to the layout. This particular work is interesting in that it is mainly clear. It's mainly fairly straightforward. One of the problems with works within alchemy is that a lot of times you're not even necessarily sure whether it's talking about the physical side or the spiritual side of alchemy. And this is a big topic because there are these two competing components of the actual tradition. You've got works that talk about spiritual topics. Essentially, it's talking about ascent, descent, renewal, magical things. And it veils them in chemical terms. Then you've got works that are telling you to do basically chemistry, and they veil them in spiritual metaphors, talking about angels, things like that. This is common in grimoires too. A lot of the angels and demons sort of content that you get in some works, not all but some, aren't really meant to be taken literally. They are metaphors. At the very least, they're magical metaphors. So you're doing magic according to their standards, but it's not exactly the same as what they, on the surface, are talking about in the literal sense, if that makes sense. Alchemy, thus, can be confusing. But Vaughan's work here is more straightforward. It's clearly about physical alchemy, although it does make some spiritual asides. It's also kind of funny because there's a little bit of backstory associated with it, where he's sort of talking about how Trithemius and Philolethus and some of these others would laugh at other people if they knew what they were trying to do within alchemy. Like, they're trying to make lead into gold. That's, like, so dumb. And it can't be done. That's, superstitious hokum, which it is. And here's the real story behind elixir. Here's the real story behind aquafortis and some of these other compounds. And that's really what it's about. At the very end, he talks about how he can't reveal too much more because otherwise he'll be, I guess, imprisoned by the authorities for heresy or something. It may be that I think that's meant to be taken literally, the postscript, which is interesting as well. It also makes an allusion to something that Pontanus spoke of. And this is the literal meaning here is the fire of the alchemists when you're trying to create basically life, to cause inanimate material to reproduce. Is not actually fire at all. It's heat. It's warmth in the earthy sense. It's actually a pile of dung. This is spoken of openly. I believe it was Hollandus who spoke specifically of this, that the philosophic fire is not, it's not a fire as in I kindled wood, I kindled coal. It's actually a pile of manure that is composting and releasing that much lower amount of heat. There's no flame associated with it because otherwise you would burn up the compounds you were actually trying to make. And it speaks about sperm and menstruate and all of these other thinly veiled terms as well. At times, this particular work appears to be speaking about human reproduction as well. That may be something that was thrown in there specifically, and this is alluded to as well, the idea that some authors deliberately attempt to confuse people. It speaks of Lully and others as well. So again, link in the description to my edition of this work on Amazon, second and third links to my books blogs, where you can find other works on alchemy among many other topics. That's about all. Peace out.